I guess it was ironic that I was giving you last week a lecture on radioprotection at the very same moment that the nuclear power plant in Fukushima, triggered by events that were triggered by the earthquake and the ensuing tsunami, basically turns out to, as of today, we still don't know what kind of catastrophe this is going to develop into. And I thought it was going to be useful. I'm going to give you something outside of the sequence to relate what we talked about last week to what is happening in the news today. If we hear certain things about the media, that the Japanese government has raised the legal standards for radiation exposure. So, what happened in Fukushima is the automatic power down system worked. The reactor powered down immediately after the earthquake. But even if a powered down reactor still produces 1 or 2% of its original heat, which is several tens of megawatts of power. The power lines that were supplying the power to the cooling system were swept away by the tsunami. So there was power loss, and then they had a diesel backup system which stopped functioning after 1 hour. So no more emergency backup power. Then they had the core isolation pumps running on batteries and the valves with which they were able to still control the flow of water. After 8 hours, the batteries were out of power. So then they had complete blackout at the power plant, no emergency diesel, no batteries. And then core degradation occurred, water was heating up. It is claimed that the reaction of heated water with zirconium was essentially then producing hydrogen gas. They tried to pump it, but in the dry well the gas built up and then led to the explosions. And from what we can see now from satellite pictures, it must have been that 3 reactors have had explosions as of now. So, to illustrate this, this is the first explosion, you see it right here, of reactor number 2. No, that's reactor number 1. You see the other 3, they look all the same, these white blocks, those are the other 3 reactors. We'll see a zoom in of this explosion from the first one in a few seconds. There you go, it's a pretty nasty explosion, hydrogen and oxygen. One does not know. The second explosion you have to watch right away. You'll see actually the flame, and then you see the debris thrown up several hundred meters into the air and coming down. It was quite some event here. You still have reactor number 4, which has the casing looking like this. Okay, but now watch this. This is reactor number 1, 2, 3, and 4. Only reactor 2, but reactor 2 is also smoking. So there's also something not good. There's four reactors that essentially are 3 of them have for sure exploded, because here's the building is no longer intact. This one's completely destroyed, and the 4th one is no longer recognizable. This one is a cartoon to show you what radiation exposure one is talking right now at the site. Here's unit 2, unit 4. This is the outer containment vessel that has exploded with the gas inside it. And now you see the radiation is 400 millisieverts per hour at number 3, 100 at 4, and 30 at 1. 100 millisieverts per hour is sort of the protection limit for the workers. And where you have, for sure you will have radiation poisoning, is at 1,000 millisieverts per hour. So this is already now at 40% of, when you work at the plant, of a dose that will create, with 100% guarantee, will create cancer. This is a view again. This is a reactor that's kaput. That's number 2, smoking. And you'll see with the helicopters, they're trying to dump water into the reactors, but they have to fly so high that the water no longer reaches the reactor because it's too high from the radiation, and then it stopped flying the helicopters. So yeah, this destroyed structure is a reactor. This is a reactor. Here are the firemen in their protective suits. Of course, the main issue in this event is, and I'll come to that, is that the radiation protection in such an event is different than in what we have with medical imaging. Because there are some elements that we can't control in such an environmental disaster. Here's the helicopter trying to fly over it at such a height that there is not as much radiation exposure, but it's way too high to have a targeted release of the water. Okay, so to come back, what were the three basic elements of radioprotection? It was time, limit your time of exposure. Distance, get away from the source. And third, shielding, protect yourself. The two elements in red are the ones that the people in Japan can no longer necessarily afford to have. Okay, so time. That means they have to limit the work at the plant. Right now, a worker can go in for 15 minutes and then he's exposed to his annual dose of radiation. So they need, like in Chernobyl, they needed several tens of thousands of workers to try to contain it. What about Tokyo residents when they're exposed to the fallout? They can't really go, it's 35 million people. Distance, yes, flee the area. It works to a limited degree. 35 million people is a lot to displace. Shielding, and this is the issue with fallout, and this is what I didn't cover last time, is the main issue with radioprotection is don't get it into your system. The skin is already a very good protector if it stays outside, but when it's in dust in the air, you will breathe it, it'll get into your lungs. When it goes into the plants, it falls on the ground, the plants will incorporate it, then you eat it down the road. So those parts are difficult to comply with in these events. So what we can do with imaging, we know where the source is, we know how much it is, we have shielding, and we can certainly limit our exposure to it. It's a far more controlled environment than what is happening right now in Japan. Okay, so we've seen up to 400 millisieverts per hour is the radiation exposure. What you're hearing here is this Geiger counter, and you see on the screen you can see what this is. This is around 0.1 to 1 microsievert per hour. Okay, this is 5 orders of magnitude below the radiation that is happening at the power plant. This is a radium source. It's one of the elements that is released by the reactor. If I can open it. Okay. It has a certain activity in microcurie, but I can just hold it here. So this is now 20 microsieverts. We are still at least 3 orders of magnitude away what's happening at the microsieverts per hour. This is still 3 orders of magnitude away from what's happening in Fukushima at this moment, even at the outskirts of the power plant. So when you relate this in terms of what we talked about last time, these are the natural exposures. So take here, we're talking natural exposures 3 millisieverts per year. And there we're talking 400 millisieverts per hour. It's just a conversion showing here. Medical procedures are on the order of a millisievert per year. And in the normal case, the nuclear fuel cycle is even less than that. Or if we relate this to our normal exposures, the 400 millisieverts or even 10 millisieverts per hour that are at the plant, you can see they are orders of magnitude above of what we are normally exposed. And even for medical procedures, we're looking here at 10 millisieverts for a CT, but you have 1 CT per year, so it's 10 millisieverts per year. Okay, so that was just to relate a little bit the numbers that we're seeing in the news these days of these